Livia, let's start, please. Dear panelists and participants, warm greetings from Switzerland. Thanks for registering and joining this webinar in such a large number. We got more than 1,300 participants who have registered for this program, and we can still already see more and more people are joining this webinar. It shows your trust with us, and this is the sixth episode in this series, and we always get very love and affection from you for each and every episode. And today's episode is very special. This is being done together jointly with the World Bank and UNESCO. And also we have esteemed experts and very senior officials from the European Commission, CEDEFOP, ASEAN region, India, as well as, of course, UNESCO and the World Bank, and private sector company, Ernst& Young. And I am Ashwani, work group leader for skills and lifelong learning policies, systems, and digitalization, working in the International Labour Organization headquarters in Geneva. And my colleague I'm together with my colleague, Livia, who is the host for this webinar. And it is our pleasure to welcome you, and it's my pleasure to moderate today's masterclass. We all know that micro-credentials hold immense potential for lifelong learning. They help people learn new skills quickly and stay ahead of the changing labor market. They can be earned faster than traditional degrees and can match the demand for specific knowledge and expertise as needed in the labor market. A recent report jointly developed by the ILO, World Bank, and UNESCO, it was called Building Better TVET Systems in Low and Middle Income Countries. The report shows that how micro-credentials can support flexible and alternate learning pathways. However, the report also noted some concerns, and particularly is that as the popularity of micro-credentials is growing, at the same time, there is insufficient evidence of their impact on outcome. Micro-credentials need to have high standards and accreditation to ensure their quality and value. They also need to be recognized and accepted by employers and educational institutions. Furthermore, they need to be accessible and affordable for everyone so that no one is left behind. And they need to keep up with the latest skills and technologies in different industries. So that shows the importance of this masterclass. So therefore, we have organized a discussion with experts about the role of micro-credentials, opportunities and challenges, initiatives taken by various countries, as well as the lessons learned by them. And I'm thrilled to present this Skills Bridge Masterclass featuring notable speakers and experts on this topic. After the brief introduction from my side, opening remarks will be delivered by Ms. Manuela Gelling, Director, Jobs and Skills at the European Commission. Thereafter, we will have two presentations. I will introduce the speakers when we start the presentations, and that will be followed by panel discussions with the esteemed experts. We will conclude the closing remarks with Abla Safir from the World Bank. And as usual, uh, in the case of a webinar, the participants' mics and videos have been disabled because we have large number of participants. But at the same time, they will have opportunity to participate in the audience poll, and they can also ask questions using Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. You can submit at any point of time. My request to you is that please also mention the name of the speaker in case you are asking a question from a particular panelist. That also helps us. And you can also use the chat button, but not for asking the questions, but for sharing information. In case you have some important information or experience from your own country, which you like to share with other participants, please use the chat button for that purpose. You can always write messages there. You can share some web links in case you like the other participants to access that information on the internet. So we have to clearly distinguish it between the chat function. Chat function is for you to interact with other participants, share information, while Q&A button is for you to ask questions from the panelists. With this one, I have to also inform you, this webinar is being recorded, and after the webinar, we will post the video recording on the website so that you or others who are not able to access the webinar can uh, uh, can see the video also. And after this today's webinar, we will also share the presentations and any other resource material which we'll receive from the presenters with all of you. So get ready for an insightful journey into the world of micro-credentials and the opportunities they offer in diverse contexts. So let us start. I will request Manuela, the Director of the Jobs and Skills at the European Commission, to please deliver the opening remarks. The floor is yours, Manuela.
Thank you very much, and very happy to be here with you today to this important masterclass on micro-credentials. We all know actually that our jobs, because we live it, our jobs and tasks are changing, and they might even change dramatically, or even our jobs might disappear as a result of the green and digital transition. However, we know, for instance, in the case of the green transitions, we have calculated that in the EU, by 2030, 2 million jobs could be also created. However, for that actually to happen, we need a workforce that has the right skills, meaning the skills that are required by the economy. And we see that actually this is not really yet happening in Europe, because we have a lot of labor shortages, particularly in 38 occupations, which are also a sign that there is a skills mismatch on the labor market. And this is actually where micro-credentials come in, because we need to make sure that when an individual invests in training, it actually has a return for this person, and that the company that would like to use the skills of this person has also a sort of guarantee that these skills have been acquired. And that's where micro-credentials come in. They are, for the individual, an element to boost one's motivation to up and reskill. And if you look at the figures of micro-credentials development over the last few years, we see that between 2018 and 2022, if we take an example, Class Central, which is an aggregator of online classes, we see that the 5 biggest learning platforms went to offer from 600 type of micro-credentials up to 1,900. So there is a huge increase. Micro-credentials have an potential, both for the economy, for the society, for the individual. But for that actually to happen, it's important that there is quality and value in the learning. And in the EU, we have addressed these aspects through a European approach to micro-credentials, where we want to promote the quality, the trust, and the uptake, and at the same time make micro-credentials more understandable and more comparable. So what we have done at European level, we have established building blocks, a common definition, standard elements, principles for design and issuing micro-credentials. And this really pursue the objective of ensuring a possibility for comparison, also across member states, of transparency, but also of flexibility for national needs or also providers' needs. So quality clearly at the forefront of micro-credentials. We are now supporting the development of micro-credentials through funding, through conferences, through studies, and actually you will have the opportunity to hear what CEDEFOP, which is the EU agencies on vocational education and training and skills, has been doing recently. And let me finish by saying that this is the European Year of Skills that started this year in May and will finish next year in May. And the main objective of the Year of Skills is actually to change the mindset of adults into upskilling and reskilling. And here we see micro-credential really as one of the key success factors for ensuring that we manage this upskilling and reskilling that is currently required by the labor market. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Manuela, for setting the scene in a very nice manner. Thanks that you clearly highlighted the importance of micro-credential in the context of lifelong learning, which is very important as the world of work is changing so fast. And at the same time, you emphasize again the importance of quality, the quality in the micro-credentials for their recognitions and acceptance also. And now with this one, and you also mentioned about important role being played by the European Commission in promoting skills and lifelong learning, and you are celebrating the year of skills this year. And we are also in the ILO, we are partnering with you on many of the events. Recently, we participated in the under the G20 the EC presidency in Spain, the event on the labor market programs also, and we are also proposing next year already. Soon a proposal will be coming to you also on joint organization of a high-level global forum on skills and apprenticeships next year. Thank you very much once again to you for joining us. Now I'll go to the our first presenter of the day, which will very nicely complement the opening remarks from the Manuela. She is an Athesia. She is senior expert in qualifications and credentials at the CEDEFOP. And CEDEFOP, for all the participants, it is the, as Manuela mentioned, is the EU agency for vocational education and training. So after Manuela's opening remarks, it makes sense now that CEDEFOP presents the study which they have done recently on the micro-credentials in the European countries. Without saying much, I will invite Anastasia to make the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashwani. And I already started sharing my screen so as to help with the timing. Warm welcome from my side from Thessaloniki. I'm very happy and pleased to accept this invitation and represent, let's say, CEDEFOP with regards to this important topic. What we have done is very much related to vocational education and training at CEDEFOP. We wanted really to put our close eye and focus on labor market education and learning. And this was not, of course, an accidental choice. We believed when we started back in 2020 that there was a real need to understand what is labor market requesting from the citizens, what kind of skills and competencies are needed, and in what sense this micro-credential, this important keyword that we're using and how, of course, it is perceived in Europe from different, let's say, member states. So without further delay, I will try to show you a bit how we did our research on micro-credentials for vet and labor market learning. This is very much divided in three main thematic areas. We first wanted to understand how the concept is perceived in Europe, how different countries, let's say, understand the concept, what is hidden behind not necessarily the term, but also the function of micro-credentials at European level. We also wanted to see the important links between micro-credentials and qualification system. This is a very important aspect, how, for example, micro-credentials can be linked, can be integrated or embedded in robust qualification frameworks in Europe. And lastly, as Manuela also mentioned before, things related to the value for end users, let's say the quality parameter behind micro-credentials. Well, this was, let's say, the last research focus we had. CEDEFOP, of course, is overseen by an advisory group that is composed from European Commission representatives from member states and trade unions who are overseeing our study and were trying to advise us along the way. But as Swani also mentioned before, this is a topic of global interest. The micro-credentials are currently being discussed almost everywhere at a national level, European, but mainly also at an international, let's say, scope. We also had a very important, let's say, consideration on how micro-credentials can be defined. Of course, I need to inform you that when we started, European Commission has not been able at that point in time to publish the important council's recommendation on micro-credentials. So for this reason, our research study has this wider dual perspective with regards to how qualifications are perceived. So if we see, for example, what a qualified person is, we realize that a qualified person is somebody in the sense of having obtained a formal qualification, but at the same time, it is by virtue of having showed the ability to carry out a job effectively. So taking this into account, we realize that micro-credentials can be very much linked to, let's say, qualifications, because they are there in order to promote lifelong learning, to enable alternative learning pathways, but they also have a very important currency and value in the labor market in general. And the same thing is actually happening at the qualification side. Of course, we used very specifically the definition that was, let's say, promoted with the European Council recommendation, micro-credentials, because this definition is key. It actually specifies, let's say, the specific components on how micro-credentials are defined, their specific focus on learning outcomes achieved, the idea of validating a short, let's say, learning and training experience against specific standards. And then at the end of this learning process, an end user would acquire something that is really certified. And I think the definition and the building blocks and the standard elements that have been proposed by European Commission is very important in this respect. Also to inform you that when we started, of course, it was a post-pandemic period, there was a lot of uncertainty that was linked to this naming and function of credentials, and there was a diverse landscape across EU, because what is considered micro-credential in one country in Europe cannot necessarily be the same in a neighboring one, and there were different terms used like digital badges, nano degrees, micro-qualifications, even module certificates and partial qualifications. So all these terms and their characteristics have links with micro-credentials. In a way, we consider it as a kind of an umbrella term at that point in time. But what is very important to understand is not, let's say, the terms, the words used, but rather in what sense you are trying to define this concept in a tight or in a more loose manner, because there were alarming voices when we started, and they were telling us that we must preserve, let's say, this attractiveness and flexible nature of credentials and not jeopardize it at all if we think about regulating or even formalizing at a bigger, let's say, scale. So in that sense, we needed to have a very good balance. Now, we were always wondering whether it's something new or really something of what we call in this slide an old wine into a new label, into a new bottle. And we realized that micro-credentials are not new. They're a phenomenon that is very much growing. From the extensive mapping exercise we have done, we saw that they're indicating a title, the date of issuing, the identity of a holder, usually the provider, and the achieved learning outcomes. So in a way, they do not present something new, but it is a different form and a different way to define better and standardize what is already existing. We also have a concrete focus on labor market sectors in our setup of study, and we saw that there is a lot of activity taking place not only in ICT, engineering and manufacturing and construction, but also in other labor market sectors such as hospitality, human health, and social work. Here I'm just using a very concrete example of the important mapping exercise we have done on two labor market sectors, manufacturing and retail. We wanted to, let's say, zoom in on the details, the content and the profile of these qualifications in those sectors. And already we saw that the same labor market sector across different countries has specific characteristics. The first and the foremost important one is that it is referring to highly targeted and specialized type of training that is designed around a specific occupational profile. So this is an important characteristic. At the same time, we saw that those types of micro-credentials used in the different countries in Europe are mainly focusing on new and emerging topics and technologies. Of course, if we think about their duration, their workload, I mean, how much time the citizens you would spend in this area, we see there's a lot of diversity and variety. It can span from hours to days to even months and perhaps a year. So it's really of a shorter duration compared to a formal qualification, but still there's a lot of diversity. The mode of delivery also differs, and it can be not only an online training, but also it can be in-person training on the job or even a blended format of training. So in that sense, I mean, these are very important characteristics and insights we got from this exercise. And finally, we were very much keen on seeing whether these type of credentials in manufacturing retail show a concrete, let's say, image of the learning outcomes achieved. And we see that that is not the case for all of these identified credentials. In essence, there are some of those that do that they really portray the learning outcomes of the specific holder of the credential, but at the same time, we might have other types of credentials that do not have this information. We also, as I told you, were interested very much in the links between micro-credentials and qualification systems, and we saw there is a lot of developments, not necessarily at all the spectrum of European member states, but still there are particular developments that are mainly related to two key developments. The first is very much linked to modularization. We believe that modularization is a way, it can act as a kind of an enabling factor towards allowing these type of credentials to enter formal qualification systems. In our research, in our published reports, somebody can access a set of websites and can see the specific examples from countries related to this topic, the linking between credentials and qualification systems. And we saw from only the ones that I have extracted for you today that modularization is very common in adult learning, and it is very much the case that modules are and the ones, let's say, the modules that are offered already in Europe are very much considered similar to the micro-credentials uptake. And of course, examples come from Belgium, from Czechia, from Denmark, and Hungary. At the same time, there are countries like the Croatian one, where they are trying to introduce credentials in their formal qualification system through legal acts. And of course, this is referring in this case to compiled units of learning outcomes that would lead to short training programs, of course, with links to European qualification framework levels from 2 to 4. But at the same time, if we go to Ireland, which is a very interesting case for us, it's a country with a long-standing experience with qualifications and having, let's say, developed a framework that allows not only formal qualifications, but also the ones that are called freestanding qualifications to enter, let's say, their system. So this is quite interesting, and we see that credentials that are very small definitely smaller than a full qualification, small as 5 credits if we think about workloads. Then these types of credentials can be used as stepping stones into something bigger. And of course, this is very much related to stackability and accumulation. Of course, countries in Europe are trying to open up their frameworks to micro-credentials. Here you see some specific examples, like what is happening in Czechia, in Denmark, in Malta. Of course, there are different terms used. Even the term award that the Maltese, let's say, context is using is very important for us. So as I said, it's not important to focus on the term per se, but rather seeing the characteristics and the function of this specific type of award of a credential in a country in order to understand it better. We at CEDEFOP, we are very much involved in analyzing and seeing all the developments in Europe, always judging on what kind of developments are taking place with regards to national qualification frameworks. And we see at least that 13 countries in Europe have reported that at least one type of micro-credentials can be part of their framework. Of course, countries are still at a development stage. They are still exploring these possibilities. And I guess that from next year, we'll have more numbers coming in. Of course, recognition of prior learning is very much linked to micro-credentials because micro-credentials can be an outcome, but also of an RPL process, but can also be a tool. I will not give, let's say, concrete focus on what you see in the slide because you will get the presentation at the end of this meeting. But the important comment here is that it might be very possible for an end user to, let's say, obtain something which is of a shorter duration, at the same time try to gain access to an education program and even progress not only in vocational education training, but it also reach higher education levels. So there are different opportunities presented with micro-credentials in this respect. There are concrete examples of good practice happening already in New Zealand. Of course, it's a non-EU country, but still it's a good practice example for us. They have developed a micro-credential system and let's say a register where they already have incorporated 150 micro-credentials at the moment. And their authorities, they are viewing micro-credentials as a complement to traditional higher education, which is very interesting example for Europe. Of course, Sweden is an interesting case for us because there's important stakeholder involvement. There are, let's say, representations from the National Research Institute, the National Agency for Higher Vet, the Digital Services Agency of the Public Employee Service, and job tech developments. So in essence, all these different actors have taken forward these discussions on the recognition and stacking of micro-credentials. The Catalonian University and Quality Assurance Agency is already piloting a program that is accrediting micro-credentials on an ex-ante basis, and they are actually focusing on short learning programs and how specific learning needs can be recorded as they have been identified by individuals and what sense they can help, let's say, these end users progress. Finland is a very interesting case for us because we see concretely the close cooperation between academia and the labor market. For example, they have developed this hygiene passport, if I may say so, which is a micro-credentials already in use in the country's education system that is designed to promote food safety by mandating food industry workers to prove their knowledge of basic food safety rules. So in that sense, this is a very concrete example. And lastly, Slovakia, with their legal arrangements, with their strategy for lifelong learning and guidance for 2030, in essence, they are including a thematic area that tries to increase, let's say, the flexibility of their qualification system, particularly with micro-credentials. Of course, all of these details can be found in CEDEFOP research reports. There are barriers there to with a wider uptake, and think this will be discussed in the panel or like more generally as a discussion. When the quality assurance standards are not there, then this can act really as a problem. Quite often there's an uncertainty about the nature of credentials, the way we record and assess learning outcomes, as I showed before, but also the way national authorities are recognized as important topic. For sure, if there are currently limited opportunities to accumulate micro-credentials to a full qualification, that can be a barrier, but still countries, at least at the European level, are trying to develop arrangements in this respect. Indeed, this is a complex landscape. So in order to talk about value and trust, we need to understand that citizens need to be already prepared and they need to be pre-engaged in order to make efforts and engage in this lifelong learning pathway. It is very important to understand that there should be a focus on the target group, which is the learner in this case. And in order for us to assess the impact of this type, let's say, of process of engage of micro-credential, we need time in order really to be able to understand how micro-credentials are really impacting the labor market outcomes, or let's say the career development for citizens, or the pathway, let's say, in the long run. There are specific conditions that trust can be built. Of course, you can see them in the slide. Very importantly is the credibility and reputation of providers. This is an important one because it acts as a major source of trust. But at the same time, quality assurance can be very important. The idea of establishing, let's say, very labor market content and relevance of micro-credentials that can be very much informed, but what is labor market needing, let's say the skills intelligence, this is considered crucial. And also enhancing metadata availability and compliance with the quality criteria are very important in order to allow us to see what kind of credentials are offered, how best they can be compared, and especially reflecting on what is happening outside formal system. Assessment, of course, is very important in this respect. There's an important vision for the future. There are different scenarios that are currently being discussed at the European and also international level, from developing a register on accredited, let's say, providers, but or even, allowing, let's say, or discussing with key stakeholders on how best national qualification frameworks can open up to more incremental approaches. But for this, we need more evidence. We need to focus more on labor market sectors. We need to understand what are these, let's say, vocational qualifications, what is their profile, their content, what kind of standards and accreditation processes can be in place in order for these credentials, of course, to be recognized and transferred. And lastly, of course, we need to see better how best micro-credentials can act as an important force towards including disadvantaged learners and people who do not have access. And as timing is running, and I know Shwani would like us a bit to respect the time set, I will finalize my presentation by telling you this important last message, that micro-credentials for vet and labor market are important. They are very promising, but everything is related on a specific balancing we need to have in mind. Getting this right is a balancing act. There are different strengths and weaknesses surrounding this important topic. And of course, we see already some benefits when micro-credentials can be linked in qualification system. But again, we can never say that micro-credentials can be considered a quick fix for everything, for any problem nowadays, especially for the unemployed or the ones that are left unregulated. So for this, we need to have robust quality assurance arrangement and specific, let's say, involvement of stakeholders that then can prepare the ground for the further uptake. Of course, I would be very happy to reply to any questions raised, me and my colleague Iraklis Pliakis from SEDEVOP side. And there's a dedicated project page where you can access and get a very good look at what we have been doing so far. And we are not only published one podcast, but we are preparing a new one in December. So please stay tuned. Ashwani, now the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anastasia, for presenting a very exhaustive presentation on the study which you have done, and presenting I will not go into details of this one at this stage because it's already very useful way you have presented. More of these we will discuss during the panel discussion. I'll take up some of these issue during the panel discussion, but thank you once again. I will remind all the participants, please, in case you have questions to Anastasia or other colleagues from the SEDEFOP, please use the Q&A tab in the bottom of your screen. Please raise the questions to her and they will be answering their questions right now also. Thank you very much. Now we'll go to the, before we go to the next presenter, let's have the first audience poll. I'll request Livia to please show on the screen. So, dear participants, you can see the first audience poll on the screen. You can only answer, choose one option only. The question is, which one of the following is the most important? All of them are good benefits, but the most important benefit of micro credentials. Just choose one. We are seeing very fast responses coming up. We'll wait for another 10-15 seconds. Please do it fast. We can see all of you are very, very active participants. Thank you very much. It shows that the number of responses we are receiving, it shows that you are very active, already listening to the participating. Now, I'll request Livia to please show the results. Okay. So you can see on the screen, the 54% have said flexibility and responsiveness is the most important benefits of micro credentials, means they can respond very fast to the labor market needs. And the second most important reason is personalized learning path. And then also the number three is the cost effective training. And lastly, it also says faster completion. Thank you very much, participants. Now we'll go to quickly to the next presenter, and that is Dr. Nina Pahuja she is the executive member of the National Council for Vocational Education Training in India, the key regulatory body in India, and they have done excellent work on linking micro credentials to the qualifications. As you have seen from the first presenter, they were saying this is an important point, and now we are bringing an example from Global South, a country from the India, how they are also doing and implementing micro credential. Over to you, Dr. Nina Pahuja, please.
Namaskar from India. I'm Dr. Nina Pahuja, and I'm going to talk about the micro credentials. I think there was a wonderful poll that was created by Ashwini and his team, and the clear verdict which has been given by, I think, the team is flexibility is the most wonderful part of the micro credentials, followed by personalized uh, learning parts, cost effectiveness, and of course, the faster learning. I do have these points as part of my presentation, but I think what I'm going to also do today is to give some examples of how micro credentials really impact our VT environment. Before I go on to that, yeah. So let's look at some of the statistics which is available. This is a slight repeat from, I think, what was said in the previous presentation. Clearly, we're looking for need for upskilling and reskilling. I think that's the need which has been advocated by almost every employer today. And clearly, there's a need for reskilling also at places. Things are changing extremely fast. It was mentioned that digital and technology is one area which is leading to a large amount of changes. I mean, if you look at things like artificial intelligence, it's changed. There was no concept of a chat GPT or others a couple of years back. It's available today. The versions are changing almost every day. There are new concepts like AI PIN that's just been evolving. So every day there's a change in this new field called AI. Automotive sector, there is so much of change that's happening almost on practically every month's basis in that particular sector. Are we not going to reskill our people? Absolutely. We need to upskill and reskill our people who are working in the industry to ensure that they are useful to the industry. So let's see, how are we going to do it? So we came up with this concept of micro-credential. But before I go to micro-credential, let me talk about what India has done even before the concept of micro-credentials came in. We actually came up with our national education policy in 2020. One of the most beautiful part of our national education policy is that it says we can embed skilling as part of general education. And a person, a child, or a person, a learner who's into school education or a general education can go back to skilling, come back to general education and continue his education, or vice versa. That was one thing that our NEP, our National Education Policy 2020, talked about. There were more work done based on that. We also said that every learning any learner does is going to be creditized. Now, the learning could be as part of qualification, it could be part of a NOS, or it could be a micro-credential, which I'm going to define right now. So we came up with that every learning, which could be a form of skilling or in school or a college needs to be creditized. And we also said that skilling also needs to become an integral part of school education and college education, so that the child or the student or the learner who comes out of the college is now more employable. So these were some concepts which came in. And of course, with the changing digital scenario and the changing technology scenario, a need for smaller credentials was, that came in straight from industry. So a micro credential, what does it do? It certifies achievement of a skill or a knowledge or a statement of learning or outcomes, which is based on strong evidence from employers or government or community. They're smaller than national occupation standards. And I'm going to define what is a national occupation standard and what is a qualification. But something which I think came in the previous presentation, which we also spoke about, was we need to ensure the quality of micro-credential. So what India has done, and as you'll see, I'll detail it out also, is that the way we develop micro-credential is very similar to the way we develop a NOS or we develop a qualification, just to ensure that the quality and the learning outcomes which need to come out of that learning are actually quantifiable if possible. So let's look at first why micro credentials. I think some of it is a little repetition of what we did mention, and I think what the audience is already, just uh, um, said as part of their poll also. So one, clearly, it's customized learning path. I think that's the most wonderful advantage. I, as a learner, want to go and follow a particular occupation, and it may be different from what is a customized. It's a given by an institute or wherever it is. So it is personalized learning path that I can choose, that I can go for as a learner. It recognizes skill, knowledge through work experience, self-study, and informal learning. I think this was another point which was mentioned in the previous presentation, where she did mention that RPL can be recognized, and RPL, the micro credentials can be a wonderful asset for RPL. But let's see how. There's a possibility that a person has done a complete course, but a micro credential as a bridge course can complement and recognize his skills. So there again, when it comes to recognition of prior learning, a micro credential can be extremely, extremely helpful for making the person productive. And of course, all of you voted for that's it's cost effective than a normal degree program. And believe me, the way we are going in today's environment is it's learning on demand. And micro credentials really help you there because it allows you with those small credentials which you can earn based on the needs that you have. So we have different kind of micro credentials, and I'm going to talk about some of those micro credentials. But we also have micro credentials that we're working on something called employability. For example, in India, we've talked about digital infrastructure, which is a main thing, which actually is now actually going to places. Almost everyone, every shop, everyone is using digital infrastructure even for payment. So can we teach those shopkeepers, the small shopkeepers, also the digital payment techniques? That again is a micro credential, which they need to be able to learn earn their learning, whatever they're doing. Again, design thinking concepts or other concepts that are coming and becoming more and more important. EVs are very important. So all those things which are in evolving industry, if it's a green hydrogen, which is again a very, very new area, uh, we need to train our people in those areas. So skill enhancement and improving their employability is one area where again we're using micro credentials in a big way. So basically, it's micro credentials are leading to industry responsiveness, and they're helping what we've seen is they're even helping entrepreneurship, which is something India is really focusing on. And Another point which we're trying to do is there are a large number of cases where industry is coming up with their own micro credentials, and that actually helps in bridging the gap between a learner who's actually graduated or is working in a particular area to work in that particular industry. So that's where we are seeing the micro credential extremely useful. So just a small uh, repetition, but for the sake of repetition, since most of you are working already in the TVET area, I'm sure you know these concepts, but still I thought I'll just put a slide. So we've defined as India a national occupation standard as something which actually has one or more key functional area and the performance outcomes, uh, what an individual performing that task should know. A qualification could be more, but qualification focuses additionally on a number of tasks. It also makes the person employable in that particular area. Whereas now micro credential are smaller units, which are which could again be across sectors, because almost everything is becoming cross-sectoral. Everything is getting digital as part of it. So it could even be a cross-sectoral micro-credential, but focusing mainly on upskilling or maybe partially reskilling. So that's what is the basic definition that we've been using. But the way we structure our NOSes or qualifications or micro-credentials and how we define them is very, very similar. In India, we are following a concept of National Skill Qualification Framework. We have level 1 to 8 as part of it. And I thought it's very important that I bring in this slide for you, because this actually will give you a concept as what we are trying to do. So as part of national education policy that we have of 2020, like I mentioned, we decided to have skilling embedded in the education. So it was also very important that we actually come up with equivalence of skilling. So components that we have as part of skill program could be, we could have a theory class or a laboratory or a field training, apprenticeship, or on the job training. These are typical components. But for all work that goes into this kind of a qualification, which has all these details, we have an equivalence of NSQF level defined, and we have an equivalent of education level also, which is created. And these are the 14 different levels that we've defined. So we have a concept that every 1200 hours of learning will lead to 40 credits in a year. So we, as part of our NCRF, which is National Credit Framework, which also came as additional part of national education policy, every learning that we do, whether it is part of education or skilling, gets creditized. And the credits of that particular skill or academic course gets added to his academic bank of credit. So those are some supporting policies also that we created for micro-credentials, which means that every qualification that I do, whether it's in auto sector or in technology sector or gems and jewelry sector, that gets creditized. Similarly, if I'm also working, say in I'm doing mechanical engineering, and I get credits for the courses that I do, but I can also do a skilling course during the mechanical engineering on the EVs and get some credits of that also. Similarly, if I'm doing a, say, BTech, or if I'm doing a medical policy course, I could also do a course on, say, artificial intelligence and see how artificial intelligence could be used for healthcare as a skilling course. So that's the advantage of doing or embedding skilling as part of education. And for all the skilling and for the education, based on the rules which also have been created, every learning gets creditized. So I've created this table just to come up with a little more clarification or details on what is the difference between micro-credential, National Occupation Standards, NOSes, and the qualification as per our India policies. Typically, micro-credentials are used for upskilling, whereas I have NOSes, which could be used for upskilling or for bridge courses. And qualification could be there for upskilling, reskilling, and of course, the normal skilling. Our typical micro-credentials are of the odd multiples of 7.5, but it could be even smaller than that. We're also coming up with the concept of nano-credentials, which could be much less than 7.5 also, because that's what industry is asked us for. Are these guidelines are totally based on what industry feedback has been to, whatever we are trying to do. National occupation standards typically are multiple of 30, but also can be multiple of 15. That's where we are. We've come up with the concept of micro-credentials, which could be public or private. So that's an initial thing that we've done. So what is a public micro-credential? A public micro-credential is something which is available for adoption by anyone, which means, for example, I may have a government policy on say, information security or data privacy or for anything else, which I want every organization to teach as part of making their employees more employable. So those are some public micro-credentials which can be adopted. Similarly, even industry may have some public micro-credentials which anybody can adopt based on the usage. However, there are some private micro-credential concept also, where the content IPR is with the awarding body of the industry. So this is some major new thing that we started as part of micro-credential, again, based on industry response. NOSes, we have, it's like qualification. It's based, they are type of, they could be based on the application, they could be generic or domain-wise, or structure-wise or approval-wise, could be standalone or other. Industry validation typically for qualification, just to ensure the quality, which was one of the major points which came in the previous presentations also. We have a concept of industry validation for qualification. For future qualification, the newer qualifications that are coming, because it's a new area. For example, green hydrogen is a very, very new area, and there are very few industries still working on it. So we've actually reduced it to 5 for future qualifications. That's for qualification. But for micro-credential, in case I have a private micro-credential, then it's 1, and that's industry who's asking for it. But if it's a future qualification, then I'm saying there are 2 industry validations required for future qualifications. And if it's a public micro-credential, then it's 5, industry validations are required. Now, this will ensure that actually that micro-credential is actually required. Levels, I did talk about the 14 levels that are there. The details of that are available on our website also. You can look at those. The level, it can come, the micro-credentials can come at any other levels. Delivery mechanism, we say it's preferably online, not necessarily online, but preferably online, because if it's a small 1 or 2 hours kind of micro-credential, we want everyone to get the learnings wherever they are. And so, of course, assessment also ideally online for that 1 or 2 learning mechanism, but then based on the micro-credential, it could be a combination, could be a blended learning type also. So just a little more details on micro-credential. What we are saying is a micro-credential could also consist of, modules of nano-credentials, and nano-credentials is something which we don't have a final guidelines. We are still working on the guidelines, and I'm sure we'll have those guidelines very soon coming in. And of course, not to forget that micro-credential will also consist of theory and the practical part of it. And of course, the digital badging, which will go with the micro-credential. A little, I've got 2 slides which actually show what is the difference between the certifications and the digital badges which are coming in. And I think it just goes back again to the poll that was created. So micro-credentials are agile, representing specific skills. And, typically in our case, our qualifications have a lifetime of 3 years. So after 3 years, we actually expect industry to be relooking at those qualifications. And if there's a modification required, modify the qualification. But in micro-credential case, we are actually open to even a faster way of updating the micro credentials. And our systems actually, allow us to do and give a time of validity of the micro credentials because we expect them to be agile. I mean, I just gave an example of ChatGPT. It's changed. I think the last couple of months itself, it got launched in November, and I think already things have changed. So needs to be agile, full stop. And of course, needs to be agile to the skill demands. And of course, based on the industry relevance, it should be verifiable and shareable badge. So that's, I think, one major difference that comes in the digital badge. Of course, not to forget development of in-demand skills. So digital badges are made for the in-demand skills and adapt to the need of the workforce. Collaborate with industry leaders, and that's why we've said that there could be a private micro credential also, which requires only one validation. So if the industry needs it and there's a good requirement of that kind of a skill, there's a committee in NCVT which actually looks at the need and does the industry validation for that and then approves it. So that's the process that we follow for everything. Just before I conclude, I thought I do have a slide on how we are moving. So we have, like I mentioned, 14 different levels. We have currently around 4,600 plus qualifications which are there at different levels. We do, of course, have some qualifications which expire and they're archived also. But we do have NOSes which have come in. We launched this concept sometimes in March of this year. And we already have some NOSes, around 45 NOSes already. And we have around 15 micro credentials already. Micro credentials are in area of currently in area of technology. In life sciences also, we have some micro credentials. And we're coming up with a large number of micro credentials in employability skills. So that's one area. I think technology and employability is one area where we're getting a large number of requests for creating micro credentials. We also, any one of these concepts like qualification or a NOS or a micro credential can be of type future skill. I think a little goes differently, I think, from the previous presentation where they said that micro credentials could be typically future skills, where in our case, a qualification can be also of type future skill or a NOS could be of type future skill or even a micro credential could be of type future skill. Currently, we have around 348 such future skill qualifications. And of course, the numbers is growing very fast with the changing technology. We also have some qualifications for a defense personnel also and defense stations also, which are part of it. So that's a little summary I thought I'll bring in. I'll be too happy to take any questions as part of the panel discussion later. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nina Pahuja, for presenting the initiatives of India in developing micro credentials, linking with the national occupational standards and qualifications, as well as a new concept, what you're also trying to develop, nano qualifications also. Thank you for providing very good overview. I think we'll have opportunity to interact with you about the lessons learned and experiences gained from the implementation of micro credentials during the panel discussions. We'll come back to you soon. Thank you. Now, dear participants, we'll launch the second audience poll. First was on the benefits. Second one is on the challenges. I'll request Livia to launch it. You can see already on your screen. So please answer this one. Which one of the following is the biggest challenge in implementing micro credentials? You can choose only one option, please. Livia, can you stop the poll, please, now and show the results? Now we can see from the screen, nearly, of course, the number one challenge is the quality assurance, but it's also very closely links follows by the recognition and portability. In fact, both are linked together. If the quality is not good, they will not be also recognized, and then if they are not recognized properly, they will not be portable also. So these are quite linked to each other. Unlike when we were doing the benefits, we knew the clear number one and number two, but here they are quite close. And then the third one, standardization, is quite close to also that one. So we can see the quality assurance, recognition, portability, and standardization comes as a very key challenges to the implementation of micro credentials. With this one, let's go to the panel discussion, and I will invite basically now we have four new panelists will join. The anesthesia and Dr. Nina Gupta, Nina Pahuja already, and these are we have Ethel Ignis from she's the education advisor from ASEAN region, and she specializes also on the future of education. Then we also have from UNESCO Wesley Teeter. He's a senior consultant at the regional office in Bangkok. Then we also have another colleague from CEDEFOP, Eklis. He is an senior expert on qualifications and credentials. And then we also have a representative of private sector, Shivakumar Murthy from the Ernst and Young. He will also give a perspective from the private sector, what they think about the micro credential in terms from the private sector angle. With this one, I'll go first. As we see in our sequence, we started from the Europe, then we moved towards the South Asia. Now we'll move further to the East Asia and Southeast Asia first. So first of all, I will start discussion with the Ethel from the ASEAN region. Welcome, Ethel. So my first question, my first question to you: what initiatives have ASEAN countries taken or are taking to promote micro credentials?
Thank you very much to our moderator, Ashwani, and good afternoon for those who are coming from other parts of the world, and good evening for those who are coming from Southeast Asia. So what are the initiatives? I would like to begin with the end in mind, that for ASEAN region, we would like to have ASEAN digital economy, which is very strong. That is our goal. And thus, the heads of states have already adopted the ASEAN Consolidated Strategy on Industry 4.0, that we need to build a digital economy. We need to have a very good technological governance, digital transformation of ASEAN society, and with that, capacity building, cooperation and collaboration among member states. Now, we need to help one another. And in the last meeting of the ministers, they have already agreed on the declaration of digital transformation of education system. So we start with a bigger regional framework that there will be more of digital inclusion, use of digital technology, digital pedagogies, and of course, capacity building for teachers and those who will be developing modules on micro-credentials. So that declaration for human resource development in the changing world of work has been our roadmap, that we really need to use different technologies. Take a look at artificial intelligence, robotics, automation, Internet of Things, and now with the challenge of the ChatGPT. Are we ready for this? Are we ready? Do we have countries offering micro-credentials in ASEAN? Well, of course, with the ASEAN Survey of Youth, we have seen that 87% of the ASEAN youth are now increasingly using digital tools. And that some said that during the pandemic, they were already trained to use online tools. So micro-credentials can be one. And that increasingly 70% of our full-time students are using online education. So the ASEAN has commissioned 2 studies on the future of work and the future of education. And I'm doing the future of education, and we have taken a look at the use of different technologies, including the use of micro-credentials. We have seen that the jobs are changing. AI, machine learning, sustainability, data analysts, and scientists are the fastest growing jobs in the region. Robotic engineering is here, and we need big data specialists. But the technology is changing faster, and we need to address things faster, right? Skills are also changing in our region. Creative thinking, systems thinking, AI and big data, analytical thinking, and technological literacy is up in terms of the ASEAN skills on the rise, which was reported by ASEAN. So how can we have these new types of workforce within our countries in the region? So, well, micro-credential is actually one of the ways by which we can respond to social, economic, and technological changes. It offers a flexible and, of course, relevant courses for reskilling and upskilling. So we can say that in ASEAN, for example, Brunei has offered some of their courses through the University Technology Brunei Darussalam, and Simeo Voctech, our center in Southeast Asia, in Brunei Darussalam, has collaborated with industries and with universities to produce some of the micro-credentials. In Cambodia, they have also developed their technological and vocational education training policy, and they're looking into the use of micro-credentials in TVET programs. Indonesia is well advanced. They have the Indonesia Cyber Education Institute, which is also based at the Open University or Universitas Terbuka. They have done a lot of micro-credentials in different levels. And if we take a look at Malaysia, it's a front runner in micro-credentials in higher education and in TVET. And they have also a system for quality assuring micro-credentials. Myanmar is assisted by ICE, by Indonesia Cyber Education Program, in terms of their micro-credentials, that they'll be offering several courses revolving around the rapidly changing global landscape. And I think Philippines has also adopted micro-credentials through TESDA, and that will be one of the best case study I will be sharing later. And they have already developed their policies from selection of micro-credentials to quality assuring micro-credentials. Thailand also did a lot of work on micro-credentials with the university. And of course, Vietnam, as the front runner of digital economy, has been increasing their access to high-quality training. And Molisa is also on top of equipping TVET institutions in terms of training requirements. And there are courses offered not only by Vietnam universities, but also the transnational education programs by Royal RMIT programs in Vietnam. So they're using micro-credentials as well. So that's practically the landscape of micro-credentials in ASEAN.
Thank you very much for giving a complete overview. And we can see that nearly most of the countries in ASEAN regions are taking steps for developing and implementing micro-credentials. And I think some of them are in the higher education sector also, which you gave an example. Now, I'm also mindful of time also, because we are taken quite a bit of time already. So I'll go to maybe as a first round to other panelists, and then in the second round, I'll come back to you, Ethel, also. So I'll go to now Wesley from the UNESCO. So Wesley, you are also working in the ASEAN region only. So it your answers will be complementing with the Ethel also. So my question to you is, what are some key principles to scaling micro credentials to transform higher education system in the Asia and Pacific region?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And it's a pleasure to go after Dr. Ethel. So really it's a chance to build on her excellent message and overview, because we work closely in this space. UNESCO and the ASEAN Secretariat work hand in hand. And I also work for the broader Asia Pacific region. So I wanted to give you a few remarks about that, not only Southeast Asia, but the broader Asia Pacific region. And I think we've missed something so far. I don't think we've talked about who doesn't have access to micro-credentials. So I'm thinking of our friends and colleagues in Afghanistan, for example, more than 2 million refugees and asylum seekers that are looking for learning opportunities, women and girls not having access to education. So when we talk about equity, we talk about digital divides, we have to think about those who are most vulnerable. And we know that micro-credentials are not reaching those learners to date. And I think this is a fundamental point that we think about principles. Perhaps the most important is, how are we looking at scaling opportunities for lifelong learning for all learners? So we have to be really dedicated to scaling, not just creating micro-credentials, but starting from the beginning with the intention of creating scale for all learners, lifelong learning opportunities for all. And I think that's at the heart of SDG 4, of course. And I think that's where we need to really emphasize this point of departure. Obviously, flexibility has been, the audience understands and wants to build on that. I think that's great. Equity, we need to talk more about. The digital divide is serious. We know from the pandemic that we made things worse. If you want to look into it, Google or take a look at the ed tech tragedy, ? Mark West, one of my close colleagues from UNESCO, looked at the ed tech tragedy ? And looked at some of the most detailed analysis of why access to learning was hindered during COVID-19, despite our assumptions of technologies providing solutions. And that speaks to relevance. And that's where UNESCO's point is really trying to get back to not only quality, but the relevance for industry, relevance for learners. And I think we need to speak more of that. We are creating micro-credentials that are not valued by learners, not valued by industry. And I know we want to create quality assurance, and we know create and use these tools in higher education systems, but we also need to think about how they're used. And we know from the last mile and other types of research underway that these credentials are not always being used by faculty. They're not being accepted for credit transfer. They're not being necessarily stacked into different types of qualifications. So there's many challenges there. So what we're doing at UNESCO is looking at the recognition piece. The Tokyo Convention and the Global Convention on Qualifications Recognition are designed to make sure that we do things in a fair and transparent way. So that's one of the most important principles for scaling, is to make sure that we do things in a fair and transparent way. And I'll send a link through the chat, but I encourage everyone to look at how we're trying to create space, policy space, for you to be creative by looking at the recognition of qualifications, recognition of micro-credentials, so that you can be creative and get those qualifications to learners and different types of employers.
Thank you very much, Wesley, for bringing this element of leaving no one behind. That it should not create further digital divide and make people more vulnerable. I think very important point. Now I'll go to the Shiv Kumar Murthy to get a perspective from the private sector. So Shiva, you are part of a private sector company, and how do you view the benefits of micro credentials for employees and employers, specifically in the hiring and career progression? Over to you, Shiva.
Yeah, thank you, Ashwini, and thank you for this pertinent question. So we've been discussing about the framework of micro-credentials, but let me give you the perspective from the industry. So I come from the knowledge industry, and therefore lifelong learning is extremely important for our survival and also for the career progression of those who are working with us. And I take your question to two parts. How important is lifelong learning and therefore micro-credentials for those who are already with the industry? And that's extremely important. So micro-credentials in our context addresses the part where the people learn exactly what they need to do. And if there's a change in their specific sector, specific job, then they get training in that, and then they go about doing their job. So the training is extremely context sensitive for their job. And of course, the success of the training or micro-credentials is measured by how it's effectively applied on the job. Now, when it comes to hiring, it's a bit muted because we don't have a well-established ecosystem to say how micro-credentials are. But what we do recognize is if someone has taken a micro-credential and has exhibited how the micro-credential has been used in the job, and then we recognize. So it's just not the qualifications, degrees, and certificates, but then if they say that we have done this micro-credential and they're able to prove that they have actually put it into some kind of job, then we recognize it, and of course we give sufficient weightage while hiring as well. Thank you.
Now, coming as we were discussing, the audience poll also, one of the key issue was also the recognition also. Now, the question to you is how to ensure the credibility and recognition of micro credentials issued by now a numerous private sector players also. So what, as a private sector, you think should be the role of the government and the private sector in ensuring that they have high quality and are credible also?
I think this is going to be a creative tension. So you're going to have a framework which is coming from the government trying to say this is how micro-credentials should be. I think Dr. Nina has already given broad guidelines of how they should be defined. And the industry is saying that I need to skill my person or my team member with this specific thing. And does it really adhere to what the government has given as a framework or not? It may not in all circumstances. So I think getting a framework from the government is extremely important. Second is giving a kind of proper qualification or a micro credential or a credit or a certificate to those people who are actually learning is extremely important. And third, I would say is, that's also come out in the part of the poll, is the portability of that credential. Because usually what the person learns within an organization stays within an organization. And if we can somehow find mechanisms of having digitally verified credentials moving from organization A to organization B, or at least since I am the data agent, the agency should be with me. And therefore, if I can have the micro credentials that I earn in a specific organization, I think that will really boost the way micro credentials are recognized in the industry.
I think this also links back to what the anesthesia also presented. I remember in one slide she also mentioned there needs to be a balance between flexibility and recognition, or
regulation.
yes, regulation. Yeah. So that's what my question was to from the private sector angle, because regulations could be very stiff also, and they can take a long time also for coming up with the regulations. Whereas the private sector wants the things to be done now. Employees wants the things to learn now. So now coming back to, I think we have not heard from the Hercules now also. Let me ask this question particularly from Hercules, but of course, Anesthesia can also chip in. This also comes very close to what we asked in the our audience poll in the challenge, which was a top challenge. So, micro credentials are being developed as you have demonstrated through your study rapidly throughout the world, particularly in the Europe. Now, for end users to trust micro credentials, which conditions must be met to ensure their quality, portability, and transferability?
Thank you, Aswani, for the question and for inviting me to this very interesting panel discussion. I really enjoyed listening to other speakers, and happy to see that we share common thoughts and considerations. I have to say that in order to answer this, first of all, we have to see what do we mean by end users. And we do not only refer to individual learners or employees, but also to employers, as mentioned by Murthy before, and of course, but to education and training providers that they want to recognize possibly micro-credentials. And also, it's not only about hiring when it comes to employers, but it's also about selecting a provider to train their employees, which is very important. So what we have seen from our study is that in order to trust a micro-credential, learners, for instance, often want this micro-credential to come from the formal education and training in the sector. Another issue that all of the end users value is to be provided by an accredited provider. But at the same time, quite often, it's the reputation of the provider that plays an important role, even if it's not accredited. So there are different issues regarding credibility, both of the micro-credential and regarding the provider of the micro-credential. At the same time, what is very important for all of these target groups, let's say, is the labor market relevance. And on top of what has been already discussed, it's very important and raises trust when they find out, when they know that the content of the micro-credential is co-shaped by labor market actors. And for instance, let's say learners know that the micro-credentials will give them the possibility to address the needs of the employers. Nevertheless, to chip into what Murthy said before, we have seen that learners have higher expectations than employees from micro-credentials, that employees are already in the labor market and know the reality. Another issue that is very important is quality assurance, that it has been discussed already quite a lot. So I will try to be brief. But I would like to just be a bit more precise regarding assessment. I have seen it that it's very crucial also in the discussion that we had in the chat. And I have to say that what we found is that it's crucial for education training providers and employers to know that an assessment procedure has already taken place before the issuing of the micro credential in order to trust it. And finally, what I would like to point out is that there is a great level of uncertainty regarding micro credentials in Europe because it's a new term. Many different terms are used at the national level. So we somehow need to raise awareness about micro credentials. EU is trying on this with the new recommendation on micro credentials, but more things need to be done. And from the point of view of providers, what is very important is transparency of micro credentials to raise trust on them, meaning the more information someone knows about a micro credential, the more possible it is to trust it. And information can include if it is accredited provider, what are the learning outcomes of the micro credential, what is the assessment procedures that are used. So with this, I tried to cover in a nutshell some major conditions in order to trust micro credentials. Thank you for giving me the chance.
Thank you very much for providing excellent perspective of this one, which sums up also the tension between, that I will say we started with an excellent presentation from the NFAC also, of course, followed by others also completely, which is coming clearly that, while micro credentials started also as a faster, flexible approach to learn. But then that learning has to be quality assured. So quality assured. But then the bigger question is that how far that public systems, which are always, a issue is there in most of the countries that they are not very much flexible, that they cannot respond to the labor market needs faster. So when we are going towards long-term qualification, when this scenario was always there, how to even assure the quality of a long-term qualifications means 1 year, 2 year, 3 years qualification. But now when we come to the days or hours of qualifications, which are micro credentials, how the same systems can assure the quality and recognition, I think is a big challenge. So I'll turn back to the Dr. Nina Gupta, Nina Pahuja, sorry, I always say Nina Gupta, because they have implementation experience. So I'm not saying, but in case, what advice most of the countries looking forward to establishing micro credentials or strengthening micro credential systems, they are very early stages. What would be your advice to them based on the lessons learned from your experience on that one? That what are the key 4 points you will advise them? I'll request you to restrict to around 1 minute so that we give time to the World Bank for closing remark also. Over to you.
Thank you so much. So I think wonderful comments which have come until now. A couple of things that I think which we are trying to follow, and I think I would advise everybody to follow, is that like I mentioned, there is a process of approving qualifications. Now, the process of approving micro-credential for us is also similar. We do complete validation of the need of the micro-credential with the industry, and then we approve that. So one, it's important that that micro-credential is required. So that's one thing which is ascertained by that particular process. Second is assessment. Since we've decided with the concept of giving credits to every learning and also to every micro-credential, it is extremely important that the assessment is actually fair and correct. So for us, every micro-credential has a built-in assessment process also, which is there. And like I mentioned, it could be online just to facilitate because the micro-credential is smaller in size. But I think if these two things are maintained, I think, like I mentioned, there was a question which I was asked also, how do you remove duplication in the micro-credential? So my suggestion, like we've taken care of, we've created a concept of a public micro-credential. The fact that we created a public micro-credential also was to reduce the duplicacy. It's like a public library of learnings that we're trying to create, which actually can stack up to create a qualification or a learning tomorrow. So I think is the learning for us. Create a lot of industry required micro credentials, which actually can be combined to create learning on the go. Today is the environment of, I think Siva mentioned, I need to learn what I need to learn. I need to be assessed on when I'm ready to be assessed, not a specific timetable. So it's learning on demand and assessment on demand. I think that's the two things that we need to prepare for, and micro credentials help us there.
Thank you very much. I think this is very important words: learning on demand, assessing on demand, which is a concept from the industry. Particularly it came from I remember maybe from Japanese companies where they didn't used to have no inventories basically, and they were able to lower the cost of the production as well as high quality standards. So let's see how these kind of a concept from the private sector can be applied in the education and training sector. Because I think it will be unfair for me to not to give any chance to Anesthesia. So maybe if you would like to have any final comment, Anesthesia, 30 seconds to you, please.
Oh my God, only final comment. Oh Lord. Yeah, I was prepared for different questions, Ashwani. No, but I just wanted, first of all, to say that all the comments by panelists are very helpful. And also for us, it's important impetus for the next set of research work on the topic. For example, this is important aspect that was mentioned on equity, on inclusion, yeah, quality assurance and recognition. These are important elements. I would also like to say we at CEDEFOP as a European agency for the development of VET, we have a very good, let's say, cooperation mode with international agencies on different topics, not only, of course, micro-credentials, but also the development and monitoring of qualification frameworks around the globe. And we really try to join forces from different, let's say, contexts, and we try to produce publications that are for our participants in the meeting that can be really useful. I already read the question in the chat: what is the difference between qualification, partial qualification, and a micro-credential? The important links. All of these are already, or at least not all, but the majority of those aspects are research, and these reports are publicly available for our participants to have access and really get insights and concrete examples from countries in Europe, and of course, reflections around the globe on these topics. So yes, I'm very happy to.
I know we have a lot of to say, but I think it's on an online format. It is better to be stick to 90 minutes format, not more than that. So as before, I request closing remarks from our esteemed speaker from the World Bank. I still see there are still 13 open questions on the Q&A tab. I'll request other panelists to please look at that one so that our participants feel happy that all their questions have been answered. So I'll turn back to now our. Can you kindly open your camera from our World Bank colleague?
Yeah, my camera is on. I hope you can.
Okay. Maybe it was hidden on my screen. Sorry for that one. So over to you. So I think you have the most difficult task now. It's so much new topics, so much diverse topic issues are there, and we have very limited time. So over to you without any further ado.
All right, let me try. Good afternoon and good evening as I'm in Cambodia. I'm very pleased to be given these closing remarks and grateful for the presentations. If you allow me a cheesy joke, I feel that I have just received a micro-credential on micro-credentials. So this has been very, very useful. I would like to make 3 points, and I'll try maybe to be briefer than the 5 minutes, given that we're reaching the end. I mean, that I think repeat some of what has been said, but yeah, hopefully some reflections for us as we move forward on these topics, in some cases together. And as you know, at the bank, we are starting to implement some of these in some of our projects. For instance, next door in Laos. And my first point is on demographics. I saw a lot of attention to youth, which obviously makes a lot of sense. Youth unemployment is a challenge in many countries, and a number of countries discussed are young countries, but the number of countries in the EU in particular, but also in my part of the world, are aging. And there's been mention of recognition of prior learning, which may and LLL as well, lifelong learning. But I hope that as we think about these topics, we also pay attention to micro credentials for older workers. This is particularly relevant for the country on which I work that is next door, which is Vietnam, one of the fastest aging countries in the world. My second point, I'm an economist, and so I approach things from these perspectives, is on this question of impact and efficiency. You mentioned that this report that we published together, ILO, World Bank, and UNESCO, we said that it's a bit too early to tell about the impact of micro-credentials, and I was very happy to hear Anastasia in particular from CEDEFOP saying, if I understand well, that I will be looking more into this topic. It's extremely important because because there is a promise maybe of low cost, but then the effectiveness of it still needs to be, so the cost effectiveness part still needs to be assessed. And I would say in particular employment outcomes, employer satisfaction. I was happy to hear examples of employers delivering micro credentials, but I think we need to track employer satisfaction. And then for the second part of this point on impact and efficiency, I think I come to it more from a student perspective, and maybe I'm a little bit old school. Repetition is key, obviously, in training, and so I was interested in the assessment on demand, learning on demand that Dr. Nina mentioned. But yeah, I'm quite curious about measuring the lasting impact of what is learned, right? If what is learned is immediately used, then it's fine. We know it's being used. But if there is some time, right, in particular when we think of the upcoming workforce or people who are in transition between jobs, I have to say that I cannot help but wonder about what is it that stays in what is learned. And so that's also a dimension that I believe is very important to measure. But yeah, from my sort of labor economist perspective, ultimately it's about employment outcomes and employer satisfaction and earnings, of course, for the learners. My last point that rejoins a little bit my first point is on this inclusion dimension. I was very happy to hear Wesley, I think, mention it, and others also agree with it. I quite like the example on the digital payment micro credential for entrepreneurs in India. Not surprisingly, Ethel, from ASEAN, because this region is extremely dynamic. So very forward-looking, IoT, various very advanced things. But the reality of the economies, including in Southeast Asia, is still a lot of informal workers, a lot of self-employed, and so I hope that micro credentials also bring some useful upskilling for those. But the other dimension of inclusion is, again, this promise of low entry costs. So and possibly a way for individuals to see if they are good at the topic, right, before possibly investing more in it, right? And that's very promising. The online dimensions are also very promising for women in particular, as they have more care responsibilities, and so you expect more flexibility. But then there is the challenge that Wesley mentioned on digital on digital divide, right? And in fact, the fact that actually many people may not be able to take advantage of these opportunities, and that could also be the case for older workers. So let me stop there. I really want again to thank everyone for the kind of class on micro credentials, and I hope we all continue learning about it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Abla, for this excellent closing. You summarized in 3 key points. It was not easy, but thank you very much. And thank you very much all the panelists and participants for staying together with us. I hope this event you will find it useful and informative to all of you. And I can still see some of the comments in the chat. They are asking whether they can access the presentations and the recordings. Yes, as we have mentioned, I am requesting my colleague Livia again to paste the link of the website again in the chat. Yes, the web recording will be available in the chat. All the presentations and resource materials will be available on the website also. And we will also by email send to all the participants the presentation and any other resource material. So once again, thank you very much. And we'll be coming up with a new topics soon in the new year, not this year. We are also interested to know what are the topics you value the most. So because any of these future masterclass again has to be demand driven. So you have our email addresses. So in case you think a particular your topic is very much important for you, where you want to learn new knowledge and expertise, please write to us. We'll be honored, and we will definitely design an agenda for the next year, the what type of classes we are going to have and when we are going to have, and we'll share in advance with all the participants. Thank you once again to all the panelists and participants. Have a lovely evening or the morning, wherever, depending on the which part of the world you are. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashwani.
Thank you, Ashwani. Well done.
Thank you, Ashwani.
Thank you, colleagues.
Yeah.
Thank
Maybe
you.
I request all the panelists to kindly just switch on your camera and mic also, so that we can have in the recording a common picture of all the panelists together. Thank you. Thank you, Vesla. You can open also your and Ethel, you also please switch on your mic. Otherwise, your picture will not be coming. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Wonderful meeting all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ashwani.
Thank you.